we've got Valery, who's going to be doing our wonderful second keynote of the day. Valery is Valery Wichman. She's currently Director of Central Policy and Planning Office, the Office of the Prime Minister in Cook Islands. And she'll be speaking on the future of development practice in the region, insights on how the pandemic has implicated the design and implementation of development policies and projects in the Cook Islands. And you've already had a little hint from Will into that 100-year development plan that's come out of the Cook Islands. A little bit of background. Valentino Valery Wichman is a barrister and solicitor, and she's a leading and long-time campaigner for human rights in the Cook Islands, receiving a Queen's Young Leaders Award in 2016. She's also president of the Te Tiari Association, one of 2 rainbow associations in the country. She's currently working on completing Te Ara Akapapaanga Nui 2020 plus, or the Cook Islands National Sustainable Development Agenda 2020 plus, a 100-year generational view based on putting people as a focus of development and putting their turanga Memi Teaki or their well-being at the core. And as if she has time for anything else, she is also one of our Masters of International Development students at Massey University. I'd like to thank Gerard Princeton for suggesting her as a speaker today. So can we please welcome Valery? Really looking forward to your presentation.
Me taki Regina, kia ora na tātou katoa, tātou te mātakitaki, te akarongo mai, ki tō tātou awatatutu te rā, te kurupo turu I roto pui a tātou, te tua o te wangeria, te tua o te kawamani, pera katoa te inua katoa, te au tangata te mautaonga I roto pui a tātou te rā, kia ora na tūrau. Warm greetings from the Cook Islands, and thank you very much, DevNet, and also my lecturer, Gerard, for suggesting me to be a keynote speaker for today. It's quite an exciting time for me to share the work that I am working on or have worked on for the past 2 years. So I'm just going to share my screen now, and we'll start from there. We as Pacific people have been practicing sustainable development since time immemorial, but sustainable development has come to the forefront quite recently, starting with the Millennium Development Goals, which focused on the developing states mostly, and then after 2015, the Sustainable Development Goals, or the 2030 Agenda. During this time, over the past 20 years, the Cook Islands has had 3 national sustainable development plans, and we've learned from each plan that we've developed. Now, towards the end of 2018, we started to think about what we were going to do after our NSDP expired in 2020. And we got a group of people together to look at how we can plan differently going forward. We wanted to look at something that was uniquely Cook Islands and something that would reflect our values, our shared understandings, and also our worldview and Indigenous knowledge. So today I will be looking at rethinking development practice through our Ara Akapapaanga Nui 2020 plus, which is our National Sustainable Development Agenda. Tō tātou ipukarea tū paupau tuatou, our homeland, our legacy. So this is about leaving a legacy into the future. I'll firstly talk about papaanga in terms of our connections and also our relationships as a starting point to sort of base ourselves. I will then go into our kimikimianka, which is our research methodology, which I talked a bit in our working group, but we didn't have enough time to elaborate on those aspects. I will then go into our tuatapapa, or our evidence base, And then some aspects of our consultations, bi oroanga. I know a lot of the conversations in the other, by the other keynote speaker was around the different ways that we interact with people. And I just want to share light on what we were doing or what we have done. I will then go into Tō Tātou Orama, our vision of Turanga me Metaki, which translates to well-being, holistic well-being or wellness. And then I will go into the actual framework or akapapa'anga, which has 3 areas to it or 3 timelines. Firstly, a 100-year aspirational vision towards well-being or Turanga me Metaki, a 25-year generational outcome document. And from the research we did, a generation is between 20 and 30 years. So we put it at 25. And then the normal 5-year timeline, which we usually use as a scorecard in terms of measuring our progress towards sustainable development. But obviously this plan goes beyond the 2030 agenda. So maybe this may be something that the globe may want to look at after that, the SDGs. And then I'll speak a bit about what we're going to do after this. So firstly, papa'anga e tō tātou pirianga. When we started to try to define what we wanted, it was important for us to understand who we are in order to know where we are going. And so our group started off with papa'anga or genealogy. This is what connects us to our land, our language, our identity. And when we went through the consultations, because not many people, especially in the outer islands, understand what sustainable development means, we talk to them in terms of us being tiaki, us as guardians, us as custodians for the future generations. And so mana tiaki is a concept that all of our people understand, and that's what we pitched sustainable development around. And lastly, but not the least, kopu tangata, which is our families and the notion of leaving no one behind. So that was the starting point of trying to refocus our planning towards our people, a people-focused approach. In terms of our research methodology, we looked at different Cook Islands methodologies, but we chose to use the ka'a as the process or the way that we were going to develop our new plan. The ka'a is the coconut sinnet, and it's quite a tedious process, but once you weave it together, I know someone mentioned weaving before. It tells a story. It talks about the community working together to come to, I guess, a conclusion or the ka'a. And so we use this because it comes from the tree of life or the tumunu, and we wanted to name the 4 generations over 100 years according to the stages of growth of the coconut tree. So that's how we conceptualized our methodology and how we did this. And it was quite some work to do around developing this, but it was worthwhile because it made us understand and also to value our knowledge base, our Indigenous knowledge base, and also to have it reflected in the way that we do things, especially with planning. In terms of our tuatapapa, our evidence base, this took about 2 years to develop. And the first part of it was reviewing or evaluating our National Sustainable Development Plan 2016 to 2020. And this plan had mixed results. The economic indicators were shining stars in that plan, but the social, cultural, and environmental indicators didn't do so well. We had 16 goals and 66 indicators, and not all of them align with the SDGs because it was important that we take a pragmatic approach at that time, that was 2014, in putting something together which would be good for us to know in terms of the information coming out. The second aspect was looking at the situational analysis at that point, which we started before COVID. And so looking backwards and also the current situation. Now, when COVID came, we had to repivot because in January 2020, I pitched this or this new development agenda to cabinet, and they didn't give me approval at that time because it was a bit different. And so when COVID came into place, I thought I'd come back and have another go at pitching it to them. And this was in about April last year, and they said yes, because they had 2 months to actually sit back, think about things, and sort of try to plan towards the future. So that was a blessing in disguise in terms of COVID and planning this, because it gave us the opportunity to relook at how we develop this. Part of our evidence base, or tuatapapa, has been aspects of future studies and the OECD scanning methodology. We did incorporate aspects of that into it. And so through our scanning research, we concentrated on 3 areas. So what scanning does is it picks up on different, signs or signals that we could sort of itemize. So we tried to itemize the top 10 signals that came out of our consultations, and in the media, the top 10 signals that came out of all the publications that we scanned. And also we held a national forum in December last year, and we wanted to gauge, we had about 400 or 500 people there, and we wanted to gauge what were the signals or top challenges or issues that people were talking about at that time. So that was the scanning aspect of our research. And then the last aspect was the scenario sketching. So making projections into the future. And we, because of time and our budget, we only looked at 3 areas in terms of our scenario sketching. First, we wanted to see a comfortable income is accessible for all by 2050. Noting that the timeline we put there for all 3 scenarios was by 2050, because the evidence that we had at the time only took us up to that time period. The second one was the Cook Islands being the healthiest population in the world. And the third one was a Cook Islands which is well prepared for climate change and its effects. Now that was quite a sensitive conversation in terms of climate change and the projections around increasing sea levels between 10 and 30 centimeters by 2050, and especially on the northern group atolls of our country. It was quite hard to talk about if there was any situation where there may be forced relocation because they can't grow food, or the land is inundated by the sea. So that was our evidence base, and our evidence base is accessible actually on our Office of the Prime Minister website. So yes, that's our evidence base. In terms of the consultations that we did, from July last year to August this year, we did 96 consultations through government, NGOs, big presence, our island governments. We had our public consultations on all of the inhabited islands. The RAC, which is the Religious Advisory Council, the Ko'utunui, which is the traditional leaders, and also we had quite a bit of interaction with our diaspora population because it's much larger than our population here at home. We also had our NSDA committee, which we set up, which are 12 members from a cross-section of society who gave differing views on the way we were doing things. Some didn't agree to the way, I guess, our research methodology was going, or some aspects of the plan, which you will see. We're launching it on the 8th of December. But it was approved yesterday by Cabinet. So we had a good group of people to sort of help and drive this process. Now, earlier on, people were talking about the relationships, and it is true. You have to, in our culture, you have to have known the person if you're going to get anything useful in terms of consultations. And we experienced that with the island governments. The island governments which our team has met and has interacted with, it was very fruitful. But there were some island governments which we have not met in person before, and so the conversation was quite silent. So those were our consultations and how we went about trying to consult with our people. And the one question which we asked of them was, what are your thoughts on well-being? So we were trying to define what well-being means to our people, which I'll come to later on. So here it is. So in terms of Turanga Memetaki, or well-being, which is our vision for the next 100 years, there are 3 areas. People felt that, firstly, it's about being comfortable. And when they talked about comfortable, firstly, they thought about kite pakari, or knowledge, and education was key. Having a home was important for people. Or managing debt or financial literacy was something that came out quite strongly. A livable income was a big one. Security at retirement, and living in safe communities. They wanted to ensure that in 100 years' time, we have safe communities. Secondly was around health and well-being. And for the majority of the consultations, well, at the beginning, it was all about health aspects. When people thought of well-being, they thought of health. And so there was the physical and the psychological aspects of well-being. One thing that was quite interesting was that people now understand that being physically healthy is not just about the absence of disease. Because NCDs have contributed, I think, 78 or 79% of all deaths last year in this country was attributed to non-communicable diseases, lifestyle and behavioral issues there, which can be linked to, I guess, mental health aspects. Psychological health was also very interesting, and some aspects of it, there is a lot of stigma, and there were a lot of sensitive conversations that we had with people around psychological health. And that is because a lot of the emphasis is on the psychosis aspect of the spectrum of mental health, but people are starting to realize that depression is part of it, and that everyone suffers from depression at one time or more in our lives. The focus on the psychosis aspects has been linked in our culture to sort of the spiritual realm, and so there was all sorts of tapu when it comes to talking about those aspects. The third area was happiness, and so well-being for a lot of people is about being happy, but not all things that make us happy is good for us. For example, smoking and drinking too much, that's not good for us, but it makes us happy. So we wanted to delve into what people actually thought what happiness is to them. The first, well, the majority of what people were saying was around our pristine environment, our language, our culture being very vital to our identity for us going forward. Our spirituality, which is an interesting one around our spirituality. Sorry, not spirituality, healthy relationships between their partners, their children, their parents, family members, friends, and work colleagues. They found that well-being was about maintaining healthy, good communication and relationships. Work-life balance was a big part of this in terms of people on Rarotonga, which could be classed the urban area of the Cook Islands, and then Matake Nangaora, community vitality. People talked about a pride in one's tribe, in one's island, through things such as national sports events, national cultural events. And this is what we put it into, community vitality. It's that pride that you feel with, or you share with your people through particular events. And then lastly,
sorry, Valerie.
Yes.
2 minutes to go.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Okay, and then lastly was around freedoms, and especially with fundamental human rights in this country, that was an area that people felt happiness was in terms of well-being. Okay, I'm not going to go through all of them, but these are the documents. So we have the 100-year. You can look at these documents as we put them out on the Office of the Prime Minister's page. Sorry, I have to skip through it. So those are the three documents. And looking forward, we will be looking at the life course approach, or well-being for life strategy, from birth to death, and how we can support well-being at all of these points during a person's lifetime. So as we say, when things are all done and agreed to, especially in consultations, kua pā te manako, kua tika te kaa. Me te kimata atawai wolo. Thank you very much.
Me taki mata. Thank you so much, Valerie. That was really interesting. We've been following this progress, and exciting to hear that this has been passed through now. This 100-year plan will be what is guiding development going forward for the Cook Islands. Can I please remind all participants to feel very free to put questions to Valerie into the chat, or you can raise your hand virtually, and then Suan and Fong will keep an eye out for that if you'd like to directly ask a question. But otherwise, pop them into the chat, please. There's so many aspects of that are just fascinating and quite inspiring, actually, Valerie. such as like you talked about, those 3 aspects to well-being that came through, the being comfortable, and how that being comfortable was understood by different people, including bringing in, because sometimes we divide out things like financial well-being, social well-being, but these often got integrated, interwoven, such as the managing debt being part of being comfortable. We know that finances can lead a lot of people to be stressed. So thinking about those things, as well as safe communities and knowledge and education, all under being comfortable. And the happiness linked into the pristine environment. And again, I know there were people that said at the start of the pandemic that it felt strange in Rarotonga, for example, to see that there weren't tourists all over the beaches. They're like, and Api and I had some respondents to our survey saying, who are we? We thought at first, who are we without these people, without these tourists? But then we saw our families returning to the beaches, our people having more time to spend enjoying their own environment. So that was a really special thing. But the spirituality, the relationships, the community vitality, and I've heard of some really cool national sporting events that have gone ahead in Cook Islands, which are really bringing people together during this pandemic period. So, huge strengths. I think there's a lot that we can learn from what's going on in Cook Islands, and fabulous to hear about your process and the consultations that were part of it. And I'm presuming there are people out there that want to ask questions. I can't see them coming through in the chat at this stage. But does anybody want to put up their hand or just unmute themselves and ask a question? I'd be very surprised if, we've got a raised hand from Isaac and Ruth. Not sure which one, from MFAT. Please unmute and go ahead.
Awesome. Me taki mata, Valery, that was really awesome to hear, and some incredible things. I think it's really cool to hear that different perspective and plan. It was interesting to hear that you brought it forward last year, but didn't go through then and did this year. So I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that process and kind of what you think has shifted, and maybe any tips for some other people in this area that are wanting to maybe come with a fresh perspective or shift things, and any tips for bringing that forward to kind of these older structures, because this might be a really great time to kind of refresh those and have a new perspective.
Yes, Meitaki, thank you, Ruth. I put it down to COVID because before COVID, our politicians were quite skeptical at this plan, sort of 100 years, what are you talking about? That seems quite far off. But I think it's important that you bring or put your evidence base together really well, and focus on a vision. And for us, that was well-being or turanga me metaki. It's about relating the information in a way that they will understand, which is what I had to do. Does that answer your question, Ruth?
Yes, no, that's great. Me taki mata. Thank you, Valery, again.
Fantastic. Thank you for that question. And we have one from Sean here. Kia ora, Valery. What are your thoughts on undertaking development from an Indigenous perspective, and the similarities and or differences with non-Indigenous understandings of development?
Thank you, Sean. I think the biggest difference is the focus on people. And so putting people at the forefront of development. We found that in our previous NSDP indicators, or the economic aspects of our country, which are important, but from the evidence that we've seen, if we focus on investing in our people and our well-being, then the economic factors should fall into place. But definitely within one generation, you will see that there will be impactful progress going forward. And I think it's very, very important because we know what's best for us. And so when we talk about localizing, that's exactly it. We know the place we live in, we know what affects us, and we know what will be best for us going forward.
Fantastic. Thanks, Valery. Remember to keep those questions coming, everybody. I've got one though for you, Valery. And you look like you're slightly frozen, so I hope you can hear me. The connection seems to be not quite so strong. Can you hear me? Okay, I'm going to try and ask and we'll see how we go.
Yes, I can hear you. It's a bit staggered.
Okay. My question is,
Okay.
what would you like from, and those of you who are planning future development in the Cook Islands, what would you like from your partners in countries like Aotearoa, New Zealand, from MFAT, from NGOs, and from researchers who are seeking to conduct research in Cook Islands? What would you like? How would you like them to approach that? What would you like them to do differently than what has been done in the past?
I think I would like them, our partners, to, I guess, partner with us and collaborate in trying to help us attain our vision of well-being going into the future. It may look a bit different from what we traditionally have done, but as I mentioned before, if we focus on the well-being of people, then that will only mean good things for our relationships and also for research.
Brilliant. And I've got to say that that central focus on well-being, I find super helpful, especially when you've defined it so nicely as you've done in your presentation, that to allow others to easily see how actually you've got it sorted. You know what matters to people of the Cook Islands who are living there. And so, yeah, how can others come on board to help achieve that vision, to help support it? Is there a place for outsiders to come in? And if there is, well, you know, it seems to me they're fortunate to be partnering with the government that's really thought through so carefully their future development plans. I've got a lovely question here from Otago Geography. Kia orana, you mentioned the initial skepticism of the Cook Islands government. What was the feeling from the international community and donors, etc.? Was there similar initial reservations or more enthusiasm?
I think initially we did not share this with everyone else, but when we did start to talk about it, it was actually quite positive. But I think for development partners with our country, it's about, as Gina asked before, how will this look like in terms of helping the Cook Islands go into the future? So definitely, I know our government did have skepticism, and that is because we talked about the neoliberal sort of worldview or thinking, and that really has pushed a lot of the agendas in this country. But right now, we've wanted to look deeper within ourselves.
Awesome. Thanks, Valery. We have another question here from James Stefata, and I know that James is a PhD student, supposedly at Massey, but still based in Hawaii. Some people may be wondering why he's trying to get to New Zealand to base himself for his research, but we think he's in a pretty beautiful part of the world. But I know there's a lot we could offer over here too. And James is saying, me take atupaka, how does the focus on relationships and defining of indicators of well-being with local terms differ from broader development goals and indicators like those put forth by the UN and others?
Sorry, I'm just reading it again. Focus on relation. Oh, sorry. Focus on relationships and defining of indicators of well-being with local terms of terms differ from broader development goals. And
So I think it's
okay,
about
so
use of those
in terms
local
of our
terms.
indicators, we actually started to yes. I think I'm starting to. Is my internet all right?
Sorry, Valerie, you've cut
Sorry.
out for us.
Can you hear me?
We can now, if you could try again.
Okay, so I think how our local terms or has influenced the indicators is how we defined well-being. And when we defined well-being, those specific areas, we've developed the indicators around them. Now, when looking at the UN or SDG indicators, there's some similarities on some aspects of well-being, but the SDGs don't specifically look at well-being per se, but there are different areas which contribute to well-being. Yes.
Okay, fabulous, thank you. University of Canterbury, again, is a question from there. Given the emphasis of well-being on environmental and communal health, what are your thoughts regarding the restart of the tourism industry? And especially, I guess, we've got Cook Islands, which around 70% of GDP comes from tourism. Should it be business as usual, or should we look at a more sustainable future for this important sector of the Cook Islands economy? And I believe it's mid-January when tourism is reopening to Cook Islands.
Yes, so the 13th of January, we are reopening our borders, and it'll be the new normal for us. We're still COVID-free, but from the 13th on, anything can happen. But in terms of tourism industry, I think for a lot of people here, they've welcomed, I guess, less tourists or less visitors to our shores, because it's given the opportunity for our environment to breathe again and to recover. And so going forward, us knowing what the impacts have been when tourism was here and seeing what it looks like now, I think it's about sustainable tourism, sustainable futures going forward for the Cook Islands, and a lot of emphasis in terms of our prosperity in our NSDA has been around diversifying our economy. Obviously, that will take some time because tourism has traditionally been the backbone of our economy. But what do we do to diversify? And that's something we need to in ways which we can do this. So yes, thank you.
Thanks, Valerie. And I know that's a really tricky one with looking at how to diversify, like you say, discussions, for example, and different opinions on deep sea mining in Cook Islands. And when you're thinking about, okay, enhancing well-being, you know, these questions can really be quite divisive too, about trying to think of strategies going forward. Okay, we've got one final question we're going to take, and again, this comes from Gerard. And he might.
No, sorry, to Regina. Regina?
Oh, yes, sure.
I withdraw the question. It's the same as James. I think you can take the next one from Angela.
Okay, sorry. Thank you, Gerard. That's really helpful. I was just going to say, Gerard might up your final mark for your 702 course if you do a good answer, but oh well. Okay, so Angela's question. To what extent do you see, so this will be the final question, and then we'll move on through to the breakout room. So I hope you're all ready for a good discussion more broadly about the pandemic-induced changes to policy and practice. So Angela's question, to what extent do you see wellbeing as a national focus versus to what extent is the Cook Islands wellbeing dependent on some of the less than beneficial policies of the global north regarding, for example, climate change. And in the global north, maybe we haven't reduced our emissions enough, but we want to see good practice in the global south. Issues around trade that then links to non-communicable diseases, because of maybe, the old example of New Zealand exporting unhealthy mutton flats to the Pacific. Aid priorities, geopolitical pressures. So that question then, it's well-being is situated within all of these complexities to do with the way that trade and international negotiations take place. Any comment on that?
Yes. I think from our perspective, well-being will be the focus. It is our vision for the next 100 years. How that is implemented, as we know, as practitioners and policy developers, there's one thing when you develop a policy, but it's different when you implement. And so the implementation of well-being into all levels, including climate change, trade, and also, I guess, the geopolitical arena may not come immediately, but the vision is there, and that is something that we will, as a country, need to work towards.
Very, very nice answer there, Valery, and great question there too, Angela. It's really making me think as well after trying to catch up on some of the news.
Very good question.
Yeah, looking at Solomon Islands and the complexities there, what's gone on in the last 24 hours, and the suggestions that there's some geopolitical issues underpinning some of the discontent there. Fascinating. Look, great. Thank you very much, Valery, for fielding all of those questions. Thanks everyone for asking them too. So some great issues being raised. Let's go into those breakout rooms now, so you've got more time to share your ideas with others, and you've got great facilitators again. There might be a couple of changes to facilitators. Some of you might be largely with the same people, but with some changes too, because some people are just attending half of today's symposium. So I look forward to hearing from you in half an hour about how those discussions go. Enjoy.